My name is Mike Ryan. I'm a graduate student at the University of Maryland in sociology, and for the last 5 years I've worked with distinguished university professor George Ritzer. I'm here today with Professor Ritzer to interview him about his book, The McDonaldization of Society. Professor Ritzer, thank you for being here.
My pleasure, Mike.
Can you start by giving us a brief history of the book?
I'm not sure about brief, but I can give you a history, which in part really goes back to the fact that I grew up in New York in the 1940s and 1950s when there was no McDonald's, no McDonaldization. So the fact that I spent my first 20 years or so never having experienced a McDonald's made that experience particularly profound for me. So the first McDonald's that I ever ran into, I think, was about 1960 in Massachusetts, as a matter of fact. And I remember that incident for some reason, and it stuck with me. Many years later, about 15 years later, I was living in Europe, and we were in Amsterdam, and came upon the McDonald's in Amsterdam in 1975. And that, too, stood in my mind. Somehow that was a jarring experience as well. So part of the origin of the book is that this experience in times and in eras and in cultures in which McDonald's was not a normal phenomenon was one kind of input into my interest in the topic. The other was teaching social theory, particularly the theories of Max Weber. As you know, Weber's theory, his primary theory, is the theory of the rationalization of the West, and his model for that process was the bureaucracy. Beginning in the late 70s, early 80s, I began to think about that process and to think about the bureaucracy, and began to come to the view that while the process had expanded considerably from Weber's time, Weber, of course, had written at the turn of the 20th century, the model had changed, the paradigm had changed, and that the fast food restaurant in general, McDonald's in particular, was a better model. The first article I wrote about that was a short article in 1983 entitled The McDonaldization of Society. It kind of disappeared at some point, and I forgot about it for about 7 years. And I was talking about some other topic related to Weberian theory in 1990, 1991. And in the course of discussing that topic, mentioned the idea of the McDonaldization of society. And most of the discussion at that meeting focused not on what I was talking about, but on McDonaldization. And so it was then that I decided that this was a book that I was going to write. So the first edition of the book was written 1992, came out in 1993.
Since then, the book has become very popular. It's received a lot of praise as well as a lot of criticism. What is your greatest frustration with the way the book has been received?
I don't know that I have a lot of frustration. I've been very gratified by the success of the book in the United States, and probably more gratified by the global success of the book, the fact that there are a dozen or 15 translations of the book. Maybe my greatest frustration has been the way in which Americans tend to pigeonhole the book as a kind of textbook, whereas throughout the rest of the world it's seen as a piece of social criticism. And so that, in effect, I have two different audiences. In the United States, it's mainly undergraduates, whereas in the rest of the world, it's a larger public audience. And somehow I wish that those two audiences, especially in the United States, were more balanced.